In order to deceive a company that pays for the roof over your head, you must first understand what they want. Well, it's a good thing they send us exactly what they want in this handy dandy PowerPoint. Smilegate wants me to make a guide of my choice, but they didn't really explain what it needed to have in it or who it was for. All that I was told was that it needed to be a video that taught something new, had a montage of character skills, that had art, or was a lore-based video. And of course, since my mouse looks like this, I took the path that I know best. But when I looked into everything that actually went into making the ultimate Epic 7 guide, I realized that Smilegate was actually asking for a few things. It started off okay, kind of fails and screams/jokes while he has literally no idea what he's doing. He lists off what the value in each piece of content that Epic 7 has to offer is. Right, so this is what they're referring to. Epic 7 basically has two types of content. The first is player versus environment, or PvE, and that includes content like hunts, altar, adventure, expeditions, labyrinths, rifts, and raids. And the second is repeatable player versus player content like arena, guild war, and eventually RTA. That part should be doable. Yeah, moving along. Next, we have the real big brain part, assessing what is worth completing and what your priorities should be in Epic 7 at the start of the game. Now, this is basically a breakdown of the last part, but with a twist. Once we've discovered what's good about each activity, we kind of have to figure out what pairs well together and what's worth doing together. Earlier focus on Wyvern 13 and Adventure means that you can focus on upgrading characters, give them their max potential, and profit. Doing arena makes you feel good about yourself and the bots that you're beating up in whatever random ELO that you're in. But of course, if you have no obligations or commitment or sense of self, you could always start like a speed rift run and then, I don't know, just try to complete it in 7 days. Don't get any sleep, miss stream times, be unable to see any of your family. Anyway, Smilegate saved the very easiest for last, and all we have to decide is when an account is well prepared and ready for Endgame. They want me to decide when an account is ready for Endgame? Have you seen how bad some of the accounts that hit Endgame are? Have you seen how hard it is to play RTA right now? How? How do I decide on this? Can you promise everyone they'll hit Legend after they finish this content? And I guess for the final thing that they want, we'll just have to do the impossible. Okay, so first off, I rated each PvE fight and how hard it was to clear. Hunts, not really hard, all things considered in 2023. Free gear, free heroes, free molas, and catalysts from this new activity. Let's get into it. This is pretty much a joke to get started now because Mui exists. Long gone are the days of needing to feed this cat Proof of Valor and needing triple HP set on him to make Wyvern 13 work. Surprisingly, after attempting to get multiple accounts to start Banshee 13, this is not as easy as you think it is. First and foremost, doing a slow Banshee 13 is just... But in terms of clearing Banshee 13 like a human, pulling a limited like Biken is more of a strain than I'd like it to be, and since that's the case, you need to have one of these to fill Biken's shoes, but dang, she's got big feet. And the winner for most underrated and undervalued hunt in 2023 is Asymanic 13. Woo! In terms of clearing Asymanic 13, it's one of the easier hunts, almost topping the charts next to the fast Wyvern Mui clear. Tamarin, Iseria, and Mercedes are the 3 musketeers of free-to-play and can clear Asymanic, your Hell Raid, your mom, and ultimately that makes justifying the investment in them even easier. Okay, now I get it's trendy and hip to say that this hunt is good now because everyone wants a protection set, but wake up people, this hunt is still not very nice, and even in this run with Mascot Hazel, it got really sketchy because I got stunned. Similar to Banshee, if it's not a one-shot, maybe we don't do this. And ding ding ding, the winner for the most frustrating hunt content that I've ever seen in Epic 7 goes to Katie's 13. Yeah, if you thought getting stunned in Golem 13 was bad, wait till you see the debuffs in Katie's 13. This bad boy can take 5 minutes or longer to clear, even with 2 times speed on. Adventure is not really something that I want to relive my nightmares of right now, but you can clear this content with the help of supporters within a week and longer, I guess, if you're playing a bit more casually. For the average player though, this content is probably clearable in about a month or 2, but this depends on how deep the crater in your skull is and how frequently you are willing to play the game. This is technically part of Adventure, so it's worth mentioning, but the truth is that if you're lazy, just go here. Just hit these guys, I promise they won't bite. Spirit Altar was never meant to be impossible as opposed to annoying or time consuming. Most of these bosses have a mechanic that's pretty straightforward, and it's actually the drops that will leave you speechless. One of the greatest additions that Epic 7 has ever added to the game is also surprisingly easy to clear at first. And then you get to these cannon guys. And suddenly, there's blasting, there's cannon fire. I'm suddenly a pirate and everyone is screaming. Now we're moving on to the more difficult content. So this is a monthly activity, which makes it decent, not the worst in the world, until you see this guy and you suddenly want to stop doing expos altogether. Not bad though, it gives good rewards, and most of these fights have a free-to-play variation with units like Tamarin, Commander Lorena, etc. Just make sure you don't forget to do them before they reset on The Abyss is exactly as despairing as the name implies. The starting floor, similar to the top of a hole, has light or hope that peeks through, and you can probably convince yourself that you're still doing okay. But similar to a deep, never-ending pit, by the time you hit floor 102, there's pretty much nothing but darkness and pain. Despite having a similarly intimidating and awful name as Abyss, this content is not nearly as bad as people make it out to be. Yes, a lot of this content is probably not made for the average early game player, but minus a few of the fights, I would definitely take this every day of the week over Abyss. That being said, no way, Smilegate, please nerf these bugs. This is not real. This content, why? Why did they do this? Why did they do this? Why is... While we're on the topic of content that makes you want to black out, let's talk about Labyrinth. There's plenty of rewards here, and it's one of the first things that you're advised to do as a new player. But the truth? Most people forget to clear this content, or they just skip over it. Making a team to clear this content is simple enough since most of the mobs are just weaker than you, but then they get the late game power up. And believe it or not, having negative 50 morale is pretty detrimental to your ability to clear the content, and you just end up getting one shot. Hall of Trials by no means is a cakewalk, but since it is a performance-based review, go ahead, you get that C. C's get degrees. Of course, ideally you want a triple S, but given how easy it is to qualify for rewards, you're probably just gonna be a slacker like me. Go ahead, get your free rewards. And finally, the most menacing PvE content that Epic 7 has ever created. Yeah, it's Rift. Ultimately, this content is out of reach for most players that are new, since they haven't even beaten Zeo before. But if there's one thing I learned while being sleep deprived for 7 days, it's that true determination and a lot of energy drinks will get you to Zeo, even if it takes you being half asleep for most of it. Getting a single clear of Rift itself is actually not that bad, especially if you have an open Grace of Growth, and if you have any other fire units built to begin with. But finally, we have arguably the most enjoyable content in the entire game. Well, Connor, what do you mean enjoyable? Actually, enjoyability is subjective. Stop it, you're reading too deep into this. The first PvP-based content that I decided to evaluate as well was Guild Wars. Now, as with all player versus player content, there really isn't any such thing as clearing it per se. So I thought about what clearing it would actually mean. And I determined that basically if you could not get kicked from your guild and at least win 1 or 2 fights per guild war, you'd qualify for a clear. And unsurprisingly, doing that is pretty tough on a new account, unless if you're fighting someone in the exact same position as you. So getting to that point in Epic 7, pretty tough all things considered, and probably one of the toughest things that you could ask from someone getting into the game. This is hands down the easiest player versus player content that Epic 7 has to offer. But open your eyes, guys, what is this? In terms of beating this content, yes, sure, this is gonna be one of the easiest things that you do in Epic 7. But that being said, you'll eventually have to fight players who do have wrinkles in their brains. And finally, the true endgame for Epic 7, it's real-time arena. This content is exhilarating. It gets your blood pumping, gear clashing against gear, whale versus dolphin. All this just to get 15%ed and then lose the match. Now, typically the act of clearing or being able to clear content is more important than the actual specific rewards that you get on the spot or the impact that these rewards will give you at the very start of your game. But let's just quickly jot down everything that you seek to gain from this last section. For hunts, you've got delusion, you've got gear, and the ability to laugh at other people who are going through the same suffering that you initially had at the start of the game. For adventure, this is your only real stable source of income for charms. You also have protection from other players that could potentially laugh at your units for them not being max awakened with their stars, and you have like a 5-star unawakened character. And of course, the final benefit is stigma. For Spirit Altar, a lot of these rewards go hand in hand with adventure, but jokes aside, you definitely get a lot of value from awakening characters, so you should definitely do it. Expeditions have terrific rewards from the season pass, and it's almost always worth it to get the upgrade, since if you care about reforging gear, Molagoras, or anything in between, you'll just get more of it by upgrading it. The Abyss also has insane rewards, all things considered, but will you turn crazy or will your dopamine kick in first? That's the real question. Find out next time. For Nightmare Raid, it is pretty similar to the Abyss. It's a race against the clock to see if you can handle being frustrated by random 15% mechanics, or if you can roll one of these and reset your anger meter. Labyrinth gives great rewards, and you don't really want to miss out on clearing the adventurous path, so this is kind of a no-brainer. Just take the free gear, sky stones, charms, etc., and just go. Hall of Trials has literally no investment whatsoever to get rewards, and you can definitely slack on your performance or pick it up and get Dagger Sakar rewards or the triple S that you've always wanted. Rift has honestly one of the most insane rewards since Automaton Tower, and it takes a lot to argue against doing Hunt in general in Epic 7, but this thing might actually take the cake. Once it's 1 or 2 shotable, and if you don't care about Mystic Metals, bookmarks, or Sky Stones, it's incomparable. For PvP, Guild War is your only main source of Mystic Metals outside of the weekly PvP reward, which you should not claim instead of Sky Stones, by the way. So getting into a guild ASAP is really important. Arena is your biggest stipend when it comes to Sky Stones, so get to champion and you're in a great spot when it comes to casually being able to pull for new units. The conquest points are also really nice in case you're interested in the new gear that's being released. However, I like using it for charms and for the slate. There is no benefit to RTA except for the occasional ego boost and the skin that comes out like once a season. You occasionally get a frame as well, but viewer discretion is advised. Now that we've got the base, it's time to talk about priorities. When it comes to Epic 7, you need to focus on 3 things regardless of what content you're doing or where you are in the game. The first priority is your character's awakenings. A lot of characters simply don't function without this funny little star right here that you can see on screen. Fairy Tail Tenebria gains her patented Dispel or Strip, which is the literal only way for her to function as a debuffer. So therefore, Alter has to be a priority, regardless of how insane the rewards are. But with that out of the way, let's talk about number 2. Something that is rightfully complained about is the lack of Catalyst, Molagoras, and even the difficulty of Adventure. But there's obviously a reason and some justification behind it. Epic 7, and I'm sure players in general, do not enjoy the idea of having a half-completed character who could be good if they just had a few more resources. They like seeing their waifus, their husbandos fully kitted out, plus 15, 6-star awaken, but the only way to do this is with more catalysts and runes. This of course isn't even taking into consideration the fact that you need to do adventure in order to unlock a lot of the more useful secondary content anyways. But I'm about to blow your mind on the third most important thing that Epic 7 players need to focus on right now. Wait, how did you guys guess it was Hunt? Was it the fact that you need gear? Was it the fact that everything after the first 10 seconds of the game involves enhancing? Well, luckily for you, gear is undoubtedly one of the most important aspects of Epic 7. No one is debating this, but what is certainly thrown around left, right, and center is whether you should do it through this or through this. The real problem is that the answer to this problem is neither straightforward nor simple. In 2023, Rift is way better than Hunt if your goal is getting more quantity of gear as opposed to specific kinds of gear. And of course, if you don't mind losing bookmarks, sky stones, the occasional 50 rare drop of reforged materials, and mystic metals, then it's kind of worth it to do Rift. You could argue that this is a huge loss, but the consistency of gaining these resources isn't reliable, and therefore it isn't even predictable. But rewards aside, we aren't even talking about the elephant in the room, which is whether it's even worth it to try and get to Rift as opposed to just focusing on hunts. Luckily for those of you who haven't reached Zeo yet or haven't been able to clear Rift, it's not that big a deal to skip out on Rift at first or to take it at your own pace. But just keep in mind that these rewards don't farm themselves, and you need to consider that you aren't just missing out on a better farming method in most cases. You're also missing out on all of this. A special shout out to the final section of what's worth prioritizing, and that's the entire range of PvP activities. Now there's no denying that some things have to give when it comes to your focus in Epic 7, but Guild War for Mystic Metals and Guild Artifacts, Arena for Slates, Mola, Energy, Charms, and Gear, and RTA for limited skins is simply a must. These rewards simply give too much value, and they also just don't use the same stamina source, so focusing on the 3 PvE activities that I mentioned before, in addition to your PvP, is just too important. Long story short, invest in doing adventure and altar, and then flip a coin and decide whether you want to invest more in Hunt or more into Rift. Jokes aside, there is no correct answer when it comes to Hunt versus Rift, but by the time that you claim all the available rewards from Rift in the seasonal pass, you will be able to clear Rift in 1 to 2 runs. So keep that in mind when you're deciding whether to do that or Hunt. Do what you'd like, but also just don't forget about PvP. So I've assessed everything that there is to do in Epic 7. I judged what was highest priority. But Connor, you forgot about the hardest challenge of all. When do you reach Endgame in Epic 7? Okay, so here's the original thesis I wrote up for accounts qualifying for Endgame. But then I realized it's easier to explain with the checklist. An endgame account can clear Nightmare Raid, It can clear at least floor 100 of the Abyss. It can maintain champion in Arena. It can also achieve Masters in RTA, clear all other PvE content that I haven't already mentioned, all of this while maintaining Arena and Guild War defenses. This is assuming that we allow regearing, of course. So why is this the list? Well, when you reach endgame, you can typically do two things. One is the ability to coast and be able to be picky and choose what content you consider to be worthwhile and worth clearing, all while still maintaining the ability to keep up with limiteds or new releases that come out. And the other is to be able to clear all new content that they release with relative ease. When content like Rift, Advent, or an extremely funny side story event like the summer side story event gets released, there's peace and assurance in knowing that your account can adapt and clear this content. Now, I included it in the thesis originally, but here's exactly what you get from my criteria of clearing endgame. You get a guaranteed 6 pieces of 88 gear every single month, a solid array of gear, resources, catalysts, molas, etc. Pulls for any number of characters that are on the banner at the time from something like Abyss, 3,200 plus Skystones at the very minimum if you're champion in Arena, a typically banger or sometimes questionable RTA skin, and the ability to gear several DPS, tanks, healers, or supports, assuming that you have either an unequip event or an unequipped scroll. If you have all this, you can laugh at all the new players that are trying to keep up with new limiteds or with new content, and that, my friends, is actually when you hit endgame.